on the role of digital media in the progressive movement and what it takes to survive in an ever-changing media landscape. He's also going to lay out the progressive victories he's expecting at the upcoming midterm elections in November and beyond. Please welcome Cenk Uygur.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. Tonight, or today, I should say, we're going to talk about something that is a little bit controversial, but it is coming whether you like it or not. And that is civil war within the Democratic Party. And that is going to start in 2 weeks. And in this case, I do mean civil. It's not like the right wing. It'll just be political and not in the physical world. There's also going to be a bit of a war between old media and new media. So I want to start talking about that because that will be prevalent throughout the next 2 years. So why? Why such harsh language? Why will there be a war? Because of a very simple reason. We don't agree. So the Democratic establishment is in favor of about 5% change. And we want complete change. We want systemic change, and we will not stop until we have systemic change. So that means a lot of things, but the first thing that it means is getting money out of politics. It is not negotiable, and as long as the Democratic establishment keeps taking donor money, which an overwhelming majority of them do, we will not agree. And I know they're used to having complete control and having everybody bow their heads, but we're not going to bow our heads. And so we will fight. And if you want to know what the reaction in Washington is going to be, whether it's the Democrats, the Republicans, or the media, go into any room in this town and mention the name Bernie Sanders. And you will get one of two reactions, either an explosion, as just happened to me in a green room earlier this morning, or uproarious laughter. And so what do I mean by explosion? Bernie Sanders, unacceptable, is what almost every Democrat and Republican in this town say. Then answer me this: why is he the most popular politician in the country? What is wrong with Washington? I mean, think about it. Everybody in this town missed every big story. And it never occurs to the old press, hey, maybe we're doing something wrong. So we saw Donald Trump coming and you didn't. Why? Because you don't understand populism. You despise populism. So you aid and abet the people who are in the establishment, even at the expense of truth. Now, do I like Donald Trump? No, I can't stand the guy. But I still saw him coming because we were open to facts. We were actually open to the polling. I could talk to you about that at length later if you'd like to know details of why the polling actually was not that wrong in the 2016 election. And we see Bernie Sanders coming. We see his popularity. And it is for the same exact reason as why the Democrats in this town don't like him. Because he is a populist. It's because he is popular. It's because he is fighting for the middle class. But Bernie Sanders is not a person. He's an idea. And if Bernie Sanders went in the wrong direction, well, because of new media, everyone would notice immediately, and they would adjust. So in terms of the fight that's coming, once the presidential election begins, which is in about 2 weeks after the midterms, that war will happen whether we talk about it in polite terms today or not. So, and it will be fought in a very dirty way by the establishment. So it's great that we're doing this now because I want everybody to understand what's going to come down the pike. And so I guarantee you that the progressives, the people who are the most progressive people in the country, fighting for the most civil rights, will be labeled as racist and sexist. It is a guarantee. Write it down in stone. It will, in fact, be the very first thing that's said. In fact, it was said to me in a green room this morning by a Democratic hack. Okay? Why? They said, oh, Bernie Sanders doesn't care about black people. Are you insane? I don't know if you guys have seen the picture of him tied to an African-American woman during the civil rights era. He didn't do that because he thought he was going to run for president many decades later. He did that because he cares. And so the idea that he is not going to represent minorities is preposterous. The only reason by the way, it is done by the same exact people who called me an Obama boy back in 2008 because I supported Barack Obama. Hillary Clinton's campaign didn't just call Bernie supporters Bernie bros. Before that, when we supported Obama, they called us Obama boys. So don't talk to me about racism, okay? So now, whether it's Hillary Clinton or not, and preposterously, it turns out it might be, she's apparently still considering it. Okay, go back in the woods. Go back in the woods. That's not a good idea. But it doesn't really matter. Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, what difference does it make? So the reality is we believe in total change, and this town doesn't want to change. So why doesn't it want to change? Because everything runs on donor money, everything. And that is what we are 100% opposed to, and that is what we will fight, and that is exactly why they don't like us. So, well, who's right, who's wrong in terms of where the country stands and where politics stands? Well, in terms of elections that have happened in 2018, well, we had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The establishment had Joe Crowley. He had 10 times as much money. He had the entire Democratic machine. He had all of the media on his side. And what happened? We won anyway. So now imagine if the money was even. My God, we would run the field. But you know what? Now it's a whole new world. Bernie Sanders raised more money than Hillary Clinton in the primaries, and he did it $27 at a time. Beto O'Rourke just raised $38 million in one quarter, and he did it with no corporate PAC money. Ocasio-Cortez, no corporate PAC money. All the Justice Democrats, that's the progressive wing of the party. Isn't it funny that it needs a progressive wing? I thought it was supposed to be a party for progressives, but it obviously isn't. So she did it with no corporate PAC money. Just Democrats, 26 of them have already won their primaries. They all did it with no corporate PAC money. And they're going to the general election now. And already we know who's going to win. We've got 3 incumbents already: Ro Khanna, Jamila and Rahul Grijalva, and then we've got 4 that are very likely to win: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley. And so they said it couldn't be done, but here we are, and we're going to have a caucus. So, and I say we because unlike traditional media, I have a perspective and I'm honest about it. So I don't know if Wolf Blitzer has never put a thought into any of the issues that he has covered over all of these years. But for him to pretend that he doesn't have a thought is disingenuous. So I think most of the traditional media represents the establishment. So let's turn to that now. So I believe digital media is far better connected to the people. It is powered by the people, often funded by the people, as we are. We take payments from the audience, $5, $10 is like a progressive Netflix. So part of the reason we do that is so that we represent them. They're our boss, instead of giant sponsors or donors. So why do I think the traditional media is in the business of supporting the establishment? Do I think, like the right wing does, that that they get together in a room and make up news? No, don't be ridiculous. Okay, they do not do that. And so we're not lunatics like the right wing, and they are. And so this is another thing that the mainstream media can't say. They have lost their minds. A majority of the Republican Party in polling indicates that they think the FBI got together, got in a room, and made up a bunch of facts about Donald Trump because they'd like to do a coup against him. That is lunacy. They have lost their minds. And you're not allowed to say it in this town because then people say you're biased. No, it's not biased. It's reality. The FBI and the news organizations in this town do not go into a room and decide what to make up. If you believe that, you're a lunatic. Okay, have I been clear enough? We're allowed to say that because we're in the business of truth. And we're not worried about, hey, are my ratings going to go down if I insult or offend Republicans? And isn't that funny? The guys who are constantly calling the other sides all kinds of names, feminazi, libtard, I could go on and on and on. The minute you criticize Republican voters, man, they get triggered. And all of a sudden they need a safe space. They say, oh my God, how could you offend Republican voters? This is why you lose. No, you lose because you don't fight for your side. You're supposed to fight against the other side. And so we do that. So how is digital media going to make a difference? And then I'll talk about what I think is unfortunately the problem of what I call old media. So it makes a difference in raising money. Before digital media, there was almost no chance of being able to raise money in the amounts that Beto is, Ocasio-Cortez is, and Bernie Sanders is. And with digital media, there is a chance. Young Turks has raised over millions of dollars, several $1 million for progressive candidates. We're not embarrassed about that. We're incredibly proud about that. So it's our audience that funds it, and it's their decision to fund it. I back those candidates if they're corporate free. If they take corporate PAC money, I got no interest. So are Democrats better than Republicans? Yes. On social issues, they are. There is a difference. Don't let anybody tell you there isn't a difference. But am I going to have my audience and tell my audience to give money to somebody who's already taken money from Pfizer and Lockheed Martin and Goldman Sachs? Hell no. Don't give them money, and I wouldn't volunteer for them. When it comes to a general election, you've got to vote. You've got to vote, okay? But primaries are even more important than general elections. So raising money has made a giant difference for those progressive candidates because of digital media. Number two, spending money. So there are a lot of people in this town who got rich off of lying to their clients. So they tell them, oh, you're in a Connecticut House race. You should spend a lot of money in TV. Are you nuts? You're going to spend in the New York market on television and only hit a sliver of the audience that you need. In Connecticut, you're going to want to hit only in your district, but the TV ads go to the entire tri-state area. What a giant waste of money. But the consultant made 15% off that. So great, keep wasting that money. We'll kick your ass even more. So here, perfect example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's in the New York market. If she had wasted money on TV, she probably wouldn't have won. But she puts all the money directed in her district in digital, and it helps her to win. Digital media is a game changer. So I remember the first time that I knew we were winning. It was in a speech in 2009 when Barack Obama was speaking in North Carolina at a college campus. And he said, I want to thank the wonderful Democratic senator that's working on health care reform for us, Max Baucus. And the whole place booed. Now, how do they know Max Baucus is corrupt? TV didn't tell them. TV loves Max Baucus. TV loves the corrupt. No, we told them. And by we, I don't mean just the Young Turks. I mean the internet. They looked up Max Baucus. They know he takes more money at the time. He took more money from the healthcare industry than any politician. The idea that he was going to do effective change of healthcare reform was laughable. So they liked Obama. They went to Obama's speech. It was a college campus in North Carolina, and they booed him when he said Max Baucus, and they were right. So third of all, now we get to the difference in media. In the old days, with no digital media, all you had was old media. You had the same talking heads that have been wrong decade after decade after decade, never embarrassed about how wrong they are. So you'd have Joe Scarborough go on there and tell you how great the Iraq War is, how great Republican politicians are. Now, apparently, he's also in favor of the Democratic establishment, but progressives, oh, no. They're either to be dismissed and ignored or derided. And so, but it's not just Joe. Obviously, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, almost all of them, okay? And go find me a couple of journalists in this town that don't have disdain for progressives. I bet you can't do it. Now you think, no, what do you mean? Most of them voted for Hillary Clinton. That ain't a progressive. So if you think you voted for Hillary Clinton and that makes you a progressive, you don't know what the word is. So the Clintons took $3 billion from donors over their careers. So here, again, here's the difference between us and the right wing. You know who broke that story? The Washington Post. And it was a great story. So credit where credit is due, and especially for print journalists, they often do a fantastic job. Unlike the right wing, we don't want to tear them down. We want to build them up. We don't want to make their job harder. We want to make their job easier. We want them to be better at their job. Neutrality is not objectivity. So it is the wrong standard. If you call everything 50-50, you will equate the lies and truth. And that gives lies an enormous advantage. So why do I think old media is pro-establishment? In fact, I don't think it has a liberal bias. I don't think it has a conservative bias. I think it has an establishment bias. So why? First of all, think about how you do coverage. What's the first thing that the writers write about and they talk about on TV? Who has the most money? Wait a minute. I would say if you raised all this money from the people who you are legislating, you just rewarded the people who are the most corrupt. I'm not impressed if you took the most amount of money from Northrop Grumman. I'm not impressed if you took the most amount of money from Apple or from any of these companies. That to me says you're less trustworthy, not more trustworthy. But what does every media outlet in this country do? Old media. They reward it by giving it coverage. They say Jeb Bush is leading. How'd that turn out for you guys? Okay. Hillary Clinton's leading. She raised more money. Raise more money, raise more money. Oh, that's so good. It ain't good. The whole country hates it. 93% of Americans believe that the politicians represent their donors and not their voters. Yet here we are in a town that celebrates it. And it's disgusting. So you reward who has the most money and who's the most corrupt in that sense. You reward establishment politicians. If you have a challenger, oh, no can do. Okay, nah, he's a plumber, he's a dentist, he's an iron worker, not interested. That's a real human, that's a real American. Okay, oh, the beloved politician from XYZ. We will shower them with coverage. They already have coverage. They already have power. You don't need to shower them with more, but you do. Now you say, hey, wait a minute. Now look, for California race is a decent example. There was 37 people in that Dianne Feinstein Senate race. You really want me to cover the 35th guy? Okay, so let's talk about what is a fair standard. How about if you looked at small donors, the number of small donors? Well, that would show energy, wouldn't it? And from real people, not from corporations. The number of volunteers, that would show energy, likelihood of winning. And by the way, I can show you progressive victories, and those two will come in at the very top for the right standards. If you saw how many volunteers Ocasio-Cortez had, if you saw how many small donors she had, you would have had a pretty good idea that she was going to win. That's how we knew. So she got almost no coverage in the mainstream press. We had done 34 videos about her before the election, not after the election. How did we know and you didn't? Because we're paying attention and we're being honest. Whereas the New York Times in that case, and many of the old media, sat on their hands and said, challenger, no, Joe Crowley. Now, at the very end, New York Times turned around, oh, he didn't show up to a debate, and they wrote one tweak article about against Joe Crowley for not showing up to that debate and sending a surrogate, which was absurd, right? But they were the first they will tell you, not just me, that they messed up. It was in their backyard, and they didn't see her coming. They didn't see her coming. Why? Because of their bias. Yes, they have a bias. It is in favor of politicians, the rich, the corrupt, and they don't know it. It's not a conspiracy. They're good people who work there. They're good people who work across the media. We're not the right wing. We don't call you the enemy of the people. We want you to do a better job. We want you to get to the truth and stop calling things 50-50 when they aren't 50-50. Now, climate change is an easy example. Let me give you a different example. Deficits. I mean, how many times have reporters in this city repeated the talking point that Republicans care about deficits? There is no basis in reality for that. Ronald Reagan doubled the deficit. George W. Bush took a $236 billion surplus and turned it into a $1.4 trillion deficit. Clinton took a deficit, turned it into a surplus. Obama took a $1.4 trillion deficit and lowered it to about $585 billion. He cut it in more than half. And what did Trump do? He comes in immediately, takes $485 billion or $585 billion deficit, and next year it's going to be over $1 trillion. It's going to be about $1.1 trillion. Republicans love deficits. And they give you one every single time. Report the facts. Report the facts. Don't tell me, oh, Republicans say they're against deficits. Well, they just created a $2 trillion hole in the budget. Why? No, because the Republicans love tax cuts for the rich. That's what they love. But more specifically, tax cuts for their donors. And so I have the credibility to tell you that because I told you ahead of time. You can find videos of me predicting these things. Why? I'm Nostradamus? No, because I actually follow the news. I follow the polling. I follow the numbers. And so I can tell you right now, every single thing that the Republicans will fight for is for their donors. Every one of them. And I predicted well ahead of time. In fact, the minute Donald Trump got in office, I said, the one thing I guarantee you he will do is tax cuts for the rich. Is it for the rich? The top 1% got on average a $61,000 tax break every single year. Every single year. So under Trump, I mean, they are going to be loaded. That's why they love him. The donors love him. Drain the swamp. What a hilarious joke. Report the truth. That's the truth. But instead, oh, 50-50, and Republicans tell me they care about deficits. You should call out that lie every single time. It has never been the case in your lifetime or my lifetime. You know the last Republican to leave office with a balanced budget? Dwight Eisenhower, who, by the way, today would be considered a massive progressive. If you did that story about, if you did a speech about the military-industrial complex now, they'd laugh you out of a Democratic establishment room. They say, well, are you crazy? I got to take money from Boeing. I got to take money from Lockheed Martin. You're talking about the military-industrial complex, right? Ronald Reagan, he did amnesty, he negotiated with terrorists, he did deal with Iran. He would, pre-Bernie Sanders and digital media, he would have been laughed out of a Democratic caucus. This country has gone insanely right-wing. Actually, to be much more accurate, let me correct myself. This country is massively progressive. Washington has gone insanely right-wing. And you didn't even notice because you were too busy calling it 50-50. So you also have great disdain for progressives, and you don't know that either. Did you cover Ocasio-Cortez before her victory? Did you cover Kara Eastman before or after her victory? Did you cover Rashida Tlaib before or after her victory? Ilhan Omar, any of these people? Did you cover them? No, you didn't. You never cover progressives. You cover the right wing over and over and over again, incessantly, hundreds of articles, and the New York Times did it again. I don't call them out because they're the worst offenders. I call them out because they're supposed to be the leading paper. And they interviewed Gavin McInnes, and they did a story about him. He's the leader of the Proud Boys. That is a fascist group who believes in violence. I'm not the one who said that. Kevin McInnes said dozens of times, I believe in violence. I believe in violence. You should punch them. You should choke them. I believe in violence. That's Kevin McInnes said that. And what did the New York Times say? They said he had a nerd aesthetic, that he just likes to drink beers with his friends. They didn't quote any of the dozens of quotes about how much he loves violence. Nerd aesthetic? To soften right-wing fascists like that. It's despicable. Why? Oh my God, Rush Limbaugh and Fox News might call me liberal. Joke's on you. You're not anywhere near liberal. You're not anywhere near objective. All you want is neutrality at the expense of the truth. And by the way, it should be noted that one of the biggest advertisers for television is political campaigns. So they spent $6 billion in the 2016 election overall. Most of that went to television. You think those multi-billion-dollar corporations don't like $6 billion in their pocket? Once a reporter told me, well, that sounded a little conspiratorial. Let me get this right. You think it's a conspiracy that corporations like to make money. I would argue it's a conspiracy to say that they don't like to make money. Okay, it is preposterous to say that. Of course, do you think that, how often have you seen segments calling out, you know what, this congressman says this, but look at his donors. It seems like maybe Dianne Feinstein, for example, says Medicare for all is a government takeover of healthcare. Well, that's totally wrong and completely ignorant. It's just about health insurance, not about the entire health system. And did anybody call her out on that? No. Did anybody call her out that a week later she went and met with health industry lobbyists and took their money? You know why she did that? Because she's corrupt. Yet, did New York Times write about that? LA Times write about that? Did anybody call it out for what it is? No, that would be impolite. The beloved Dianne Feinstein is an establishment politician. You have to give her all the press and all the credit and not call it out for what it is. Anderson Cooper asked over and over, and Bernie Sanders was too polite in the 2016 race. Do you think Hillary Clinton changed her votes based on the money she took? So let me answer it right now. Yes, absolutely. They all do. They all do. They take the money and they vote that way. Hey, are you real? Do you believe in a conspiracy theory that the corporations that give money to politicians don't want something in return? But they would be fired. They have a fiduciary responsibility to get a return on investment. The first time they give to a politician is a test. The second time they give to a politician is because they got a return on investment. This whole town is corrupt. This whole town is toxic. So digital media calls it out, and we are connected to the people, and that is why we will champion progressives, and that is why we will win. And let me just conclude on this. 2020, which will, as I said, start in about 2 weeks, we'll go through 2019 and 2020, as you know, will be a giant clash between the old and the new. It'll be the old style politicians. We do this on the show all the time. We cover all those debates and town halls live. And when Martin O'Malley takes off his jacket, I tell the audience, and everybody knows, he's going to roll up his sleeves. Why? Because that's what a consultant told him to do. Okay. The rest of the press will say, Bernie Sanders, his hair is uncombed. The country sees that and goes, that's a real person. Okay? So we're going to have that clash. And unfortunately, and I'm telling you ahead of time, and you know I'm right, old media will be on the side of the establishment. And by the way, one of the things that they will do is they will leak to you guys. They will leak their Oppo research to you guys, and you will not call it what it is, which is Oppo research. You will run that, and you will be disingenuous to your audiences and say, wow, look at this thing I discovered about Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or whichever progressive is in the race. You do it all the time. The problem is progressives are play too nice. As you can tell from this speech, I'm not in that camp. And they don't fight back. Well, this time, we're going to fight back. And when we do, yes, it will be, well, as I started, war. And I welcome it, I look forward to it, and we will win it.
Don't go anywhere.
Okay.
So isn't this a great country where you can come to Washington, welcome to Washington, by the way, and say Washington is toxic?
Yes.
And walk out of this room unharmed?
For now, yes.
For now? Yeah.
Well, there's bombs all over the country because of Donald Trump. So for now, yes.
Well, let me, as president of the National Press Club, you've taken a lot of swings at the media. I've been a reporter, an editor, worked in journalism. I've been a journalist for almost 25 years. And I got to say that all of the reporters and editors I know work so hard to get it right and work so hard. I work for Bloomberg. And objectivity, not false equivalence, which you have called out here, but objectivity is incredibly important. It is incredibly important to have, to me personally, to have a fair and unbiased standard of reporting, right? And I understand that everybody has an opinion, and you're welcome obviously to it, and we welcome you here to state your opinion. But I know you called out Wolf Blitzer at one point as not having a thought. But when Wolf Blitzer was here accepting an award 2 years ago, every single person who came and spoke about him said he was the hardest working man at CNN, that he was such a hardworking reporter. So I just want to recognize here that the reporters and editors who are working for newspapers and TV, all of which are also digital now, right? They work really hard. They're not in it for the money.
Yeah. Yeah, Andrea.
They work hard, and they work hard to get it right. So.
Okay, so let me agree and disagree. So do they work hard? Of course, I don't begrudge them that. No, nowhere in my speech did I say they were lazy.
I think you did.
No, I think I said they were wrong. That's different than lazy. And so Wolf Blitzer, his problem isn't whether he works hard or doesn't work hard. His problem is he does have a perspective, and he might not even know it. His perspective is the status quo is awesome. So Hillary Clinton is acceptable, Jeb Bush is acceptable, Bernie Sanders is not acceptable, Donald Trump is not acceptable. And so it oozes out of every broadcast.
I don't want to speculate on his perspective.
No, you don't have to. You don't have to. You look. Let's. No. I can speculate. It's not speculation. I'll tell you what CNN's motives are: profit. It's not complicated. They're a giant, multi-billion-dollar corporation. Why are they in favor of the status quo? Well, they don't want to rock the boat because it's their boat. It's their boat. If you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation, you do not want change. You just don't want it. So it's not that they give a memo to Wolf Blitzer, although MSNBC literally told me that my non-establishment thinking was not welcome. But that's unusual. Normally, it is in the hiring decisions. When's the last time CNN hired a radical? You may say, well, of course you're not going to hire a radical. Think about that. Of course you're not going to hire a quote-unquote radical.
I mean, CNN should be in the business of hiring reporters, not politicians, right?
Well, but what is the perspective that they present, Andrea? The perspective is status quo, establishment. It should be the truth, but it isn't. So let me ask you this. Jake Tapper on CNN, and these are not bad guys. I know Jake a tiny bit. I know Chris Cuomo a little bit. Alison Camerota is wonderful. There's a lot of great journalists at the New York Times, Washington Post, et cetera, and they do great stories. Okay, but Jake Tapper goes on air and says Medicare for All costs $32 trillion, but he leaves out that it saves $34 trillion. And he asks Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, how are you going to pay for it? Every time, watch it. I'll tell you ahead of time, not afterwards, not Monday morning quarterback. I'll tell you ahead of time. Every time a progressive goes on air, on CNN or elsewhere, they will ask him, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? Wages, higher wages, anything that helps the middle class, how are you going to pay for it? Did they ask him, how are you going to pay for it on a $2 trillion tax cut for the rich? Did they ever ask him, how are you going to pay for the Iraq war that cost us trillions of dollars? No, they bowed their heads.
Are you sure?
I'm positive. New York Times, you saw Judy Miller. They always apologize afterwards, but they never learn their lessons. So how about Iran? Warmongering, fear-mongering on Iran, on Syria too, but everybody constantly feed into it. I've never seen a single question of Syria, how much is that going to cost? Never.
Okay. I think there are a number of things that we could agree to disagree on. Let's talk a little bit about politics, right? So let me just ask you this. How much money have you or the TYT network, since we're talking a lot about money, raised for Bernie Sanders?
So I don't have a specific number on Bernie Sanders, but I would imagine that our audience gave a significant amount to him.
Collected by you?
No, it goes straight to the candidates.
It goes straight to the candidates. All right.
The only exception is we're running ads against Ted Cruz. And so we collected that money and we're running the ads against Ted Cruz. But otherwise, they donate straight to the candidates.
So I'm very curious about one thing. You mentioned an upcoming civil war within the Democratic Party starting real soon. How do you think that's going to play out?
So I think it's going to be an absolute mess. And as I explained here, I think that you're going to have the Cory Bookers of the world that represent the establishment. You're going to have Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, et cetera, on the other side. They will do Oppo research. They will put it in and hand it to you guys. You guys will all run it. Okay, you will run almost no negative stories about Cory Booker, but you will run incredibly negative stories about Bernie Sanders. Cue it. Watch me. Okay, they'll talk about his houses. They'll talk about race. I know the Oppo research already, and you know it too. And you're going to run it anyway. You're going to run it anyway.
So let's talk about how you see this civil war playing out within the party. You see Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders on one side. Do you see new progressives emerging within the party? Do you foresee a split within the Democratic Party? Do you see a new party emerging? Let's talk about specifics.
Yeah, no, I don't want a new party. So it's a great question, and it's bifurcated answers. So should there be a split within the party? Yes. So if they want us to, so they say unity. Okay, great. Well, let's unify behind the most popular politician in the country, Bernie Sanders. No. Hey, you said primaries are a bad idea in 2016 when you wanted Hillary to win. Now that Bernie's the most popular, all of a sudden you think primaries are a fantastic idea. So let's pick. Which one is it, right? So I love primaries. I've been consistent about that. Should Bernie get a free ride in the primary? No. Let's fight. Let's figure out who's right, and let's have people vote. Okay. And so, but should you splinter the Democratic Party overall? No. It's a fool's errand. I think it's a disastrous idea, and it will only help the right wing win.
Do you think it will happen anyhow? You're saying you don't think it should happen, but you're talking about civil wars.
Yeah. No, I don't think the Democratic Party will splinter. I think that there will be a healthy and sometimes not healthy a fight over ideas. We're not going to bow our heads when they say, "Hey, let's take donor money and let's just keep spending on for defense contractors." Our answer is no. It's a hard no. It's a hard no. So what do you want to do? This is a democracy, so we debate, right? But it doesn't mean you leave the party. And if anybody's going to leave the party, it should be them, not us.
Which would still result in a splintering, right?
Hey, listen, if they want to go join the Republicans in celebrating donors, they're welcome to it.
Are you supporting Bernie Sanders for 2020? Do you think?
So I supported Bernie Sanders in 2016 based on the field. The
And
field
going
is not
forward?
set yet. So no, right now I have an open mind, and I want to see what who the candidates are and what their positions are going to be.
Who are some of the potential candidates you see emerging besides Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, whom you've already mentioned?
So almost obviously Cory Booker will run. Obviously Kirsten Gillibrand will run. Kamala Harris will run. Joe Biden will run.
Let's talk about some of the people that you see as progressives that you would like to see there.
Yeah. Right now, the ones that are considering running, I think that there are only two, Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. Are there other great progressives in the country? Yes.
That you would like to see run
I think
on a presidential ticket?
Well, look, I think on a presidential ticket, those two will cover it, right? So I don't need to splinter that vote. But if Bernie or Elizabeth Warren, for whatever reason, don't run, then I would say Nina Turner should get in, and other strong progressives should get in. Who are other strong progressives? Ro Khanna, Pramila Jayapal, whose name I screwed up earlier. Sorry to her, and other wonderful progressives that are out there. Look at how strong Andrew Gillum is running, and he ran a strong progressive campaign.
Let me open this up to the room for questions. If there are questions from the audience, I'd like to take some. Please.
Thanks, Andrew.
And
Hold
sorry,
on.
let me just say, John is going to be passing around the mic. So when you do get the mic, please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
So,
and hand the mic back to John.
Bob Weiner, club member, and Weiner Public News, and it's great to see you again, Cenk.
Thank you, Bob.
You made the point that the mainstream Democrats are 5% of the progressiveness of the rest of it. But how do you see the elections breaking out? And if the Democrats take it, doesn't that take you to healthcare policy, tax policy, budget policy, the very things that you're talking about that are important? So isn't your 5% really a little short on the comparison between the progressives and the mainstream Democratic Party? And how do you see Bernie versus Warren? Where do you think that goes in terms of who becomes the one of the two?
Okay, good questions. Thank you. So on the 5% change, let's be clear in what we're calling liberal and not liberal and the policies. So I don't want people to get this wrong, and it's a common misconception on all sides. So the establishment Democrats, as I call them, it's not that they're not liberal in any way, shape, or form. They're liberal on social issues. Yeah. So are they in favor of rights for African Americans, gay Americans, et cetera? Yeah, they are. That is why they are greatly preferable to the Republican Party. But on issues of the economy, they're 5% changes, I think, accurate. So let's look at Obamacare. He wouldn't even do the public option because his buddy Joe Lieberman, his mentor Joe Lieberman, told him he didn't want the public option. Why? Joe Lieberman took a tremendous amount of money from the healthcare industry. That's corruption. Max Baucus didn't want the public option. That's corruption. He takes tremendous amount of money from healthcare industry. So what do we get? We got Romney Care. I mean, that was literally the same exact plan as Mitt Romney. It was cooked up by the Heritage Foundation. 5% change. Was it better than the old days? Yes. Yes. It's demonstrably better. A little better. The correct thing to do back then, which he now acknowledges, is Medicare for all. But that's the problem with the Democratic Party. They acknowledge things that are true and real after they leave power, right? The issue of marijuana. My God, why didn't Obama legalize? He didn't even take it off of Schedule I drug. In that case, it was 0% change. Are you kidding me? You've got millions of African Americans and of all races rotting in jail on modern-day slavery. And yes, it's slavery because they get paid $1 a day, $1 a day to work in those prisons, okay? Because they smoke marijuana. But I got news for you. Barack Obama smoked marijuana. So did George W. Bush. So did Bill Clinton. Let's put them in jail. Unless we're putting them in jail, then release those millions of people that you put in prison because of this senseless prohibition. And he wouldn't even go there, even though he himself did it. 5% change, not interested. Marijuana should be legalized all across the country, and those people should be freed, okay? So now the second question you had was?
How do you see, Warren versus Bernie.
Warren versus Bernie.
How do you see the elections coming out?
Yeah. I have no idea how Warren versus Bernie is going to go. So since I make predictions on the air, and I've done a couple here, people always ask me, hey, make a prediction about this. No, you make the prediction once you have the facts. You don't, it's not a game. So I don't know how it's going to go between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. And I'm curious, and I can't wait. I want to see. I don't know that they'll fight. I'd be surprised if they fought. But at some point, if it's just those two, obviously they got to make a case against each other or for themselves. And so I'm curious as well. I don't know.
Do you have a preference?
Not yet. I mean, look.
If this fight were happening between them today, you're very well informed about both of them, right? So
yeah.
You've got to have a preference. You're the person up here who's saying, I
That's
can have
right.
an opinion, right?
So that's super fair. Super fair. Okay. I know both their policies, and the reason I like both of them because they both have great policies, and they are both deeply progressive in slightly different ways. And right now, if I had to vote, I'd vote Bernie Sanders.
Why?
It's because he was the first to the fight. He's been there all along. And I wish that Elizabeth Warren had run last time around. And barring that, I wish she supported Bernie Sanders. And I told her that to her face when she was on the show. And I asked her about it. And so I wish she was there for progressives in 2016. Unlike other progressives, though, I don't hold it against her. So it's a new day, and she's done many wonderful things. She fights against the banks harder and better than anyone does, okay? But I think Bernie is slightly more right on the issues, and that is a small difference, and I think that he's been a bigger fighter for those issues.
Okay.
And the election, what do you project, Mr. What do you call it, Nostradamus?
No, I said I'm not Nostradamus.
Yeah.
Right now, if I had to, predict who's going to win, I'd say, Bernie Sanders. But I will tell you this.
I mean on that. I mean the House and Senate.
Oh, the 2018 elections, yes. No, that one, at least in the House, is easy. The rest is hard. The House is clearly the Democrats are going to win, and they're going to crush them. Crush them. The polling is real. Math is real. Science is real. So I know why people are gun shy in saying that, because they got 2016 wrong, and they think there's magic, that Donald Trump can do voodoo and somehow take giant losses and turn them into wins. There is no voodoo. He brought out unlikely voters, and in this case, the unlikely voters don't even necessarily go to the Republicans, and Donald Trump's not on the ticket. The polling is real. They'll get wiped out in the House.
Just when you're saying people think that Donald Trump can do voodoo, I'd like to point out that I don't think that anybody in the mainstream media has said we think Donald Trump can do voodoo.
No, I hear you. Let me, if you want, then I'll clarify. So there is a concern in the Democratic Party, and I have, and there's a concern in mainstream media to not get too out in front of your skis about saying the polling indicates this. I
think people do say the polling indicates X, right? But with, a reminder that, there's a little bit of a
margin of
cushion
error.
there. Margin of error.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, I blame the Democrats more than I blame the media on this. But there's this fanciful thinking that somehow that Donald Trump's going to pull out a victory, even though he's deeply unpopular. No, the reason he pulled out the victory last time was because he was running against someone even more unpopular. That's the only reason why.
So when you say there's going to be a crushing victory within the House, since you're in the business of making predictions today, give us some sort of quantifiable.
So 218 gets you a majority. We're going over 230 easy. Easy. That's my prediction.
All right, there we go. You have it here.
Senate is too hard to tell, and I'll tell you why. So you got some people that are running standard campaigns like Heidi Heitkamp, and so looks like she's going to get her clock cleaned. The idea of running Republican light in these red and purple states, it's never worked. The Democratic Party has lost 1,000 seats in the last 10 years with that failed strategy. Well, why do they never learn their lesson? They're paid not to learn their lesson because the lobbyists want you to keep supporting the donors, even though it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. On the other hand, Richard Ojeda, running in the 3rd District of West Virginia, runs a populist campaign. He's not the most progressive, but he's very populist. He closed a 40-point lead. You know how he did it? Nonstop ads talking about how his Republican opponent is corrupt. And he's right. She takes money from the pharmaceutical industry and helps to poison the people of West Virginia with that opioid epidemic. And he just had the temerity to say it. And people respect that. They respect when you fight for your positions and when you fight for them. And so that's why the Senate's hard to tell, because they got a bunch of corporate Democrats like Donnelly and Heitkamp, and some of them will win and some of them will lose. If we had progressives across the board, we'd clean their clock in the Senate, too.
We have a question over here in the middle of the room.
Hello, sir. It's really nice to talk to you. I've been watching the Young Turks since 2015, so...
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Cedric. I'm sorry.
And your news organization?
I don't actually work for a news organization. I'm originally from Africa,
okay.
From Rwanda. And Rwanda is a dictatorship where everything is always said and good. The president, even on a lot of news, is always shown as someone who's built the economy when there's a famine. When there's a 16-17% unemployment.
And this is clearly a country that had a civil war not too long ago.
And so there's this myth, and that's like what you were saying, sir, about how there's false equivalency, and where people know that that's not the truth. And so one of the things that we've seen for us, we do try to use digital media to inform the population. Is that digital media is the best way to connect with the population, and it works. We've created different things to do that. But what advice would you give us as someone who's worked to kind of create digital media even before, at the beginning of this internet age? What advice would you give to people who are trying to change how the news is presented in a country that is repressive, like in Africa and stuff like that? Thank you.
Well, so that's a great question. I really appreciate the question, because I'm going to say it now for the 3rd time or so, because I don't want people to get the wrong impression. I think that the journalists, especially in countries like Rwanda, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, oppressive regimes, are the bravest people on earth. And so if you're a journalist calling out Putin's government in Russia, my God, you have 1,000 times the courage that I do. Because Andre is right. It's easy for me to come out here and make this speech. I'm not going to get poisoned on the way out, right? But in Russia, you might, and in many other countries. So it's easy for me to say, go get them, but I know the dangers, and I appreciate the incredible bravery that those journalists have. In terms of what to do about it, we got to get you technological help. We need those VPNs to infiltrate those countries. Because if you're doing it inside of Rwanda or Saudi Arabia, God help you, right? Unfortunately, you got to do it outside the country because As we saw in Saudi Arabia, you could be butchered if you're doing it inside the country or even inside their embassy. So we got to do it from outside the country, and we got to get those VPNs to get past the censorship in those countries, including my home country of Turkey. It's, it's supposed to be a democracy. I wish it would get back to that.
Do we have another question here in the back?
Testing. Yeah, Holly Kellum, The Epoch Times. One thing I appreciate about traditional media is that they are willing to put forth a view that probably many of the journalists don't agree with. Does the Young Turks do that?
Yes. So we just had a decent-sized disagreement about whether Megyn Kelly should be fired. We have dozens of hosts. They all have their own opinions. Some of them drive me crazy. And every day I get a question, why don't you fire this person and why don't you fire that person? Because we have a range of opinions. So if you want orthodoxy, go somewhere else, okay? We're real people with real opinions, and we don't limit them. So on Megyn Kelly, a number of hosts thought she should be fired. I thought she shouldn't be fired. And we talk it out. And that's what, that's what I think is good about the show, is that you'll get that, and you'll have a real, honest conversation with real people, not robots reading from prompters.
And one follow-up question. You talked about how journalists should be more honest about their viewpoints, and I agree with that. But do you think that all mainstream media should be like the Young Turks and, be more upfront about their opinions on their shows?
So great question. Not necessarily, especially for print journalists. So I believe that there's a great role for objective reporting, and we actually have a wing of the company that isn't commentary. It's TYT Investigates, and they do objective reporting. And so they can report against Democrats, Republicans, progressives, anything they like, okay? And they have free reign to do that. And so, but when you're an objective reporter, that's what I insist on, objectivity. So I'm not interested in Democrats said this and Republicans said that. Who cares? What's the reality? I don't need you to be their stenographer. And so I'm not remotely interested on what corrupt politicians said. And if you want to say that in the context of a story, but then say, but now here's the reality, great, I love it. Okay, so another good example, and I can give you dozens, filibusters, obstruction. So they say, both sides say that the other one is obstructing. But wait a minute, there's facts, number of filibusters. Mitch McConnell broke the record under Obama by a long shot. So if you want to say, hey, Republicans say they don't do obstruction, Democrats say they do, then at least give me the number. Well, Mitch McConnell tripled the record of filibusters, so there's your evidence on who does obstruction. And by the way, you could do that about Democrats today. You could say, hey, Democrats are now doing filibusters or whatever it is. Well, they took it away, but at least on the judges. And give those facts. I'm not looking to protect anyone. I'm looking to get at the reality and stop telling me what their spokespeople told you.
How do you ensure within, so you have an investigative unit, clearly you are best known for speaking opinion.
Yep.
So how do you push your reporters who are doing work for the investigative unit to be objective and not biased? Or do you think that's not important?
No, again, let's be clear about the terms. If you're going to be biased as an objective reporter and say, well, the numbers indicate this policy is wrong, but I'm going to be in favor of it anyway. No, that's not interesting. Then I would just have, first of all, I don't want anybody to be wrong about the numbers. Our hosts that do commentary as well. But I don't need the reporters to have an opinion. We got a lot of that at the network, right?
Right.
So what I want them to do is focus on the facts and so focus on investigations.
Do you ask them to keep their opinion out of the piece?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And how do you make sure that's happening?
Well, we have a process in place. We have a managing editor, Jonathan Larson, who worked at MSNBC, CNN. Mm-hmm. He worked with Anderson Cooper, Keith Olbermann, et cetera, and he's vigilant about that. Mm-hmm. And you could read the pieces yourself, and you get a pretty clear sense.
You learned that vigilant at those establishment news organizations?
That's a fair point.
Asking.
Yeah. But by the way, a lot of people did not learn that vigilance at those networks. That's why I didn't hire him. I hired him.
Mm. Vigilance is important. I think we can probably agree on
that.
Yeah.
Well, look, you're asking me, and that's fair because I'm the one up here. But does anybody think, you don't see the neutrality in the mainstream press?
So you did say at one point, you said, report the truth, report the truth. And
yeah.
I know that I personally, as a journalist, have worked hard for my entire career to do exactly that, to report the truth. My news organization, Bloomberg, we try incredibly hard. We work so hard to keep bias out of our stories and to report the truth. We follow the numbers. You were talking about numbers, right? That includes money. We follow the money numbers. And I think a lot of other news organizations do that as well. I think there is I think there is a struggle sometimes between false equivalence and objectivity. But I think, and I'm not the person who
I know.
answers matter here, but I do think that objectivity as a goal, as a pure goal, is key.
Okay, fourth time. There's some great reporters all over mainstream media, and I've quoted Bloomberg on some great pieces that it's done. But I do believe, and this is where our disagreement is, that there is an institutional bias. And I think that the mainstream media, I don't mean it just at Bloomberg, I mean all the mainstream media. And I believe that they are scared to death of being called liberals by Republicans. For 30, 40 years.
I think most reporters, I think the job that we do, you can't go into it being scared to death of doing it. You just go and do it and try to get it right.
Look, here, I had Sam Donaldson on the show a long time ago, and he gave me a great anecdote about the old days when things were better. Okay, so he said every time that he covered Reagan and Clinton and asked hard questions, and their White House called up to complain to ABC News, Roone Arledge would give him a raise. That's a great story. I love that story. I wish we'd go back to that. Okay. Now, I talked to a mainstream media reporter who's a friend and a good guy and a good reporter, and off the record, and obviously I'm not going to give his name, a couple of years back, and he said, Cenk, if we don't have sources, we get fired, and you can't burn your sources. Now, think about that, and you know it. You know that's real. If you say the Republicans create bigger deficits, which is an absolute fact, well, the Republicans don't like that. You just lost your sources. All of a sudden, your livelihood's on the line. That's a reality.
Well, I think we can probably both agree that we should all be asking the hard questions all the time.
Yes.
Good. Well, I would like to thank you so much for being here today. It was a pleasure to have you here. It was great to hear your thoughts and ideas. And I'm sure we'll be hearing much more from you soon.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here and being open-minded about that, and I really, really appreciate it.
And in fact, before you go, sorry, I have one, it was hiding here. I have a gift for you. From the National Press Club. This is our coffee cup, our mug. We give it to all of our esteemed speakers. So here, please accept this and use it in good health and come back.
Thank you, and I love coffee mugs. This is going to drive my wife crazy because I have 1,000 of them, but that's for commemorating this moment and being so thoughtful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here? Sure. I don't. No, I'm okay. I've got to get to Capitol Hill by
If you need a place to come hang out, you can come to
Okay. All right. Again, look, I know it's a March speech, but those are my videos.
I know they are. I just, are you close to Starbucks?